Usually when we look at the sheer, like, blinding pace of the modern world, there's this underlying assumption that we are, fundamentally different from the people who lived 100 years ago.
Oh, yeah, completely.
Right. Like, we look at our smartphones, the omnipresent AI, the way we can just instantly beam a thought across the globe. And it becomes so easy to assume that the human operating system has just had this massive fundamental upgrade to match all that.
Yeah, it's a really pervasive cognitive bias. We consistently confuse technological advancement with like psychological evolution.
Exactly.
The tools get shinier, the bandwidth gets wider, and so we just sort of assume the internal mechanics of the human mind have leveled up too. But human nature doesn't iterate on an annual release schedule like software does.
It really doesn't. But it's almost a comforting illusion, right? Feeling like we stand at the absolute pinnacle of human development, just immune to the struggles of the past.
Oh, definitely. It makes us feel safe.
But then you stumble across a document, like a genuine time capsule that shatters that illusion entirely. And that's what we're doing on today's deep dive. We're looking at a text that basically proves the actual machinery of human ambition, of anxiety, of getting in our own way hasn't changed one single bit.
Not even a little bit.
So the book is from 1913. It's titled You Can, a collection of brief talks on the most important topic in the world, your success. And the author is George Matthew Adams.
And I think it's important to point out for you, the listener, that reading this, it isn't like reading some dusty, archaic self-help manual.
No.
It's really like sitting across the table from a remarkably blunt, deeply wise mentor who just sees right through the noise of any era and calls you out on your own nonsense.
Yeah, he really doesn't pull any punches.
And the year 1913 is just the perfect crucible for this. I mean, the world was standing on the absolute precipice of unimaginable change, right? Of the First World War, massive industrial explosion, societal upheaval. Yet Adams completely ignores the shifting external landscape. He focuses with this laser precision on the unchanging internal landscape. So the goal for our exploration today is to extract the most potent, timeless frameworks from this text.
Because the overarching thesis is so simple, right? Your technology is going to change by the minute, but the core engine of your success does not.
Exactly. We're going to deconstruct how Adams viewed human potential, the architecture of a resilient mindset, and the literal physical mechanics of taking action.
And the book just announces its intentions before you even get to the first chapter. The dedication page is, it's a masterpiece of brevity.
It really sets the tone.
It simply reads, to Bill, the first reader of these talks, just Bill. No last name, no grandiose titles, no academic credentials. It just instantly establishes this grounded conversational vibe.
Yeah, and then he immediately drops in that poem by Walt Mason, which functions as this tribute to the man who delivers the goods.
Oh, I love that poem.
It's crucial because it draws this stark dividing line right at the starting gate. It contrasts the people who sit around complaining about the friction of life with the people who just accept the friction and execute anyway.
Right.
Like, it specifically mocks the people who blame the rain for the fact that they lost their umbrellas, or they blame the night for the fact that they don't have lanterns.
Those complaints are just so recognizable today. Like the guy who complains the gods haven't treated him well, or the person watching the clock terrified they might labor a minute too much.
We all know those people.
We work with them right now. We see them complaining in Slack channels instead of just, fixing the problem. And Adams pairs that poem with a quote on the title page from Thomas Carlyle that says, "The king is the man who can."
Which is such a powerful statement. Carlyle's quote strips away all the superficial markers of status. In Adams's worldview, royalty has absolutely nothing to do with bloodlines or wealth or even intelligence, really.
It's purely about agency.
Exactly. Royalty is purely a measure of agency. The sovereign individual is the one who executes, the one who can. If you cannot deliver the goods, you are not the king. I don't care what title is printed on your business card.
Right, but to become that sovereign individual, Adams insists we can't start by trying to conquer the external world. You don't start by trying to build a business or influence crowds. You have to start by conquering the internal landscape.
The internal governance.
Yeah, and he introduces this incredible framework of the general manager. He points out this really obvious but profound flaw in the human design we are born without: a book of instructions.
Think about the implications of that missing manual. When you purchase a complex piece of machinery, it comes with detailed schematics, right? Troubleshooting guides, operational limits.
Yeah, a massive PDF you have to read.
Right. But a human being is the most complex machine in the known universe, and you are just handed the keys with zero documentation. So Adams argues that because of this structural reality, every single person is, by default, drafted into the role of general manager of their own life.
You're entirely responsible for figuring out how your own machinery operates.
Exactly.
When I read that, I immediately visualized a modern knowledge worker calling a literal board meeting inside their own brain. Like, imagine walking into a glass-walled conference room, locking the door, taking the seat at the head of a long mahogany table, and forcing all the fragmented facets of your personality to give a status report.
Oh, that's a great way to picture it.
Right. You have your inner CFO at the end of the table hoarding anxiety about next quarter's budget, your inner PR director who is obsessively worried about what people on the internet think of you, and then, like, the inner intern who just wants to scroll through short-form videos all day.
The intern is definitely running the show most days.
For sure. But as the general manager, your job is to bring that chaotic room to order.
And that visualization captures the immense burden Adams is placing on the individual. We inherently crave the title of general manager. We want the authority, the autonomy, the corner office of our own lives.
We don't want the work.
No. We actively shrink from the brutal, unglamorous work of actually managing that boardroom. We let external forces do our thinking for us. We let the algorithm or our boss or societal expectations set the agenda for the meeting.
And if you abdicate the role of general manager, your internal company goes bankrupt. Adams actually poses the question, who's conducting your shop anyway? Which is a brilliantly aggressive question to ask yourself when you feel overwhelmed.
It really cuts through the noise.
And he ties this directly to a very heavy definition of responsibility. He brings in a quote from a figure named Ancellus de Insulis. Learn as if you were to live forever. Live as if you were to die tomorrow.
By using that quote, Adams is forcing the general manager to operate on two radically different timelines simultaneously.
Right, the macro and the micro.
Exactly. Your responsibility isn't just to manage the immediate crisis of today, it's to manage your ultimate potential over a lifetime. He argues that responsibility must be entirely internally generated before it can be externally applied.
If you can't hold yourself to a standard, you can't hold the world to one.
Right. And he introduces a fantastic word here, wobble. He says, if you wobble on your own inner commitments, you have already failed.
I love the word wobble. It perfectly describes that feeling of caving on a personal rule.
Yeah, the external failures like losing the job, missing the deadline, ruining the relationship, those are just lagging indicators. The actual failure happened weeks ago when you wobbled in the boardroom of your mind and let the intern take over.
So true. But the mechanics of stopping that wobble require a specific tool. The general manager can't just rule by decree. They need a diagnostic mechanism.
And Adams provides one, which he calls the why test. He introduces it as the ultimate cure for lost motion.
Lost motion is such a perfect industrial age concept. It refers to a machine that is expending massive amounts of energy, generating heat and noise, but not actually producing any forward work.
You see that all the time today.
Oh, constantly. Adams looks at human behavior and sees an epidemic of lost motion driven by what he calls headlong action.
And headlong action is basically the default state of the modern hyper-connected worker. It's the frantic typing, the back-to-back meetings, the endless checking off of trivial tasks.
It feels like productivity.
It does, but it's just kinetic energy without a vector. The why test forces a sudden, screeching halt to that momentum. Adams demands that we put ourselves on the stand hourly and ask, why should I do this thing? Why should I refuse to do it? Why do I squander this specific block of time?
Why am I worrying about a scenario that hasn't happened? Putting yourself on the stand hourly sounds exhausting, but when you look at how easily a day gets hijacked, it makes total sense.
It really does. If you stop someone who is frantically working and ask, wait, why are you actually doing this specific task right now? They often just freeze.
They don't know. They're just caught in the momentum of headlong action.
Right. And Adams pairs this rigorous why test with an absolutely brilliant personification. He says we have to employ respect, but he doesn't treat respect as an abstract feeling. He says respect is the fellow who tends door for your conscience.
I love that. Treat that metaphor seriously for a moment. What is the function of a doorman or a bouncer at an exclusive venue?
Quality control.
Exactly. The bouncer evaluates everything trying to enter and makes a harsh, binary decision based on the standards of the establishment. So, respect is a massive, unsmiling bouncer standing outside the velvet rope of your contents.
Checking the ID of every thought and impulse.
Yes, an impulse walks up and says, "Hey, I'd like to spend the next 2 hours arguing with a stranger on the internet." The bouncer named Respect looks at the ID, looks at the impulse, and says, "You aren't a productive endeavor. You're a petty grievance. You aren't getting in."
And if you fire that bouncer, Adams warns that your conscience becomes ill unto death. It just gets flooded with trash.
When you synthesize the Y test and the bouncer named Respect, you uncover a very sophisticated psychological feedback loop.
You really do. Asking why interrupts the automated, thoughtless behaviors. It forces intentionality. And when you start making intentional choices that align with your long-term goals, you naturally begin to generate self-respect.
You aren't just a leaf blowing in the wind anymore.
Exactly. You're an agent of your own life. And as that self-respect grows, the bouncer at the door gets stronger and more discerning. The threshold for what you allow to occupy your mental space gets higher.
It builds the bedrock of character. Adams writes, "A man can be on no better terms with anybody than with his own self."
Which is such a great line.
It is. So we have the internal architecture built. The general manager is seated at the head of the table, constantly running the why diagnostic, and Respect is manning the door, keeping the noise out. The machine is calibrated.
But a perfectly calibrated machine sitting in a garage achieves nothing.
Right. We have to look at how this internal clarity converts into external momentum. And this transition from internal governance to external execution is where Adams gets incredibly aggressive about the nature of time and routine.
Very aggressive. His framing of time is completely inverted from how we usually discuss it today.
Yeah, today the dominant paradigm is time management. We talk about time as a passive container, like a bucket of water. We try to save it, or we worry about it running out.
Adams just rips that passive framing apart. He doesn't describe time as a concept. He describes it as a living entity. He calls it the man in the job put to action.
It's a radical elevation of the concept. By stating that time is business, money, the errand boy, the clerk, the problem, the state, he's arguing that time is not the space in which work happens. Time is the exertion of force itself.
Time never stops to tie its shoestrings. It's a relentless active current.
He illustrates this with a quote from Napoleon Bonaparte that just stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
Basically, Napoleon said, "The reason I beat the Austrians is they didn't know the value of 5 minutes."
Wow.
Think about that. Napoleon is moving hundreds of thousands of troops across the European continent, managing supply lines that stretch for hundreds of miles, dealing with geopolitics on a civilization-altering scale. And he boils his competitive advantage down to a 5-minute margin.
The Napoleon quote is amazing because it isolates the compounding nonlinear nature of time. 5 minutes sounds trivial, but if you understand the actual value of 5 minutes, you don't leak them.
Right.
In warfare, 5 minutes is the difference between securing the high ground or being caught in the valley. It's the time it takes to rest a cavalry unit before a charge.
And in a modern context, knowing the value of 5 minutes means recognizing that the time you spend hesitating before making a difficult phone call, or the time you spend mindlessly browsing before starting a deep work block, it's not neutral.
No, it's ground-seated to the enemy. Adams warns that this specific day will never dawn again. Time is the freest thing in existence, which is exactly the trap.
Because it's handed to us for free every morning, we treat it as worthless.
Yeah.
If you were physically charged a monetary fee for every hour you were awake, you would ruthlessly audit your activities.
Oh, absolutely.
But because we wake up with a fresh 24 hours in the bank, we squander the 5-minute margins. And to prevent that squandering, Adams introduces the concept of system.
And system is the rigid architecture required to harness the relentless flow of time. Adams is uncompromising here. He states that without system, the most stupendous task, regardless of how much passion or energy you throw at it, will crack, crumble, and fall into a wreck of waste.
You can have the strongest general manager in the world. You can have a terrifying bouncer guarding your conscience. But if you do not have a systematic methodology for deploying your effort, you are going to spin your wheels.
System is what makes progress smooth, predictable, and sure.
But this is where Adams introduces a fascinating contradiction. I want to push back on it a little bit here. He builds this imposing monument to relentless action. Value the 5 minutes like Napoleon, build rigid systems to prevent waste, never stop moving.
Right.
But then, almost immediately, he warns us against getting stuck in ruts. Specifically, he talks about the imitation rut.
The imitation rut is a highly specific danger for systematized thinkers. It occurs when your system becomes so deeply ingrained, or you become so hyper-focused on observing the systems of successful people around you, that you transition from being an original creator to being a mere duplicate.
You optimize yourself into a state of pure mimicry.
Exactly. And to break out of the imitation rut, Adams advises us to read, to delve into the mysteries of the past, to compare old thought with new thought, and critically, to vary our work each day.
He says we have to give rest to the human machine and slip away into new surroundings. So let me challenge this paradigm. Is there not a massive, unresolvable tension here?
How so?
Well, on one side of the ledger, Adams is demanding we be like Napoleon, ruthlessly optimizing every 5-minute window, operating a rigid system to capture all lost motion. On the other side of the ledger, he's telling us to step away, rest in the machine, go read ancient history, and vary our routine.
I see what you mean.
How can a person simultaneously be a relentless execution machine and a rested, wandering, original thinker? Like, in 2026, we call trying to do both of those things burnout.
It is the defining tension of high performers, for sure. But Adams resolves it through a concept he calls together. And he breaks that word down into 3 distinct words. To get there.
To get there is to get together.
Precisely the mechanism. He's diagnosing the anatomy of human failure. He describes a person who fails as someone who is all apart, all unhitched.
Oh, I like that, unhitched.
Yeah, their brain is disorganized, their will is starved, their focus is scattered across a dozen different anxieties and half-finished tasks. If you're unhitched and scattered, taking a break doesn't rest the machine. It just provides a different flavor of distraction.
Because your mind is still racing.
Right. But if you are together, if your internal forces are concentrated and unified, you operate with a terrifying level of efficiency.
He illustrates this with the analogy of a gun, right? He says a divided, unhitched mind is like birdshot. When you fire a birdshot, it scatters a wide pattern of small pellets everywhere.
Lots of noise.
Exactly. Loud noise, smoke. It might hit a few trivial targets, but it loses all its kinetic energy instantly. But a unified mind, a mind that is together, is like a single rifle ball. It concentrates all the explosive force into one heavy projectile, and it hits the target with devastating, clean impact.
And that analogy is the key to resolving your tension. The mind must be unified, systematized, and disciplined so that your action can be swift and precise, like the rifle ball.
Ah, okay.
When you operate as a rifle ball, you accomplish the stupendous task thoroughly and quickly. You aren't frantic. You don't need to work a 16-hour day because you didn't waste the 5-minute margins.
Because you hit the target with a single devastating shot, you actually earn the margin to rest the machine.
Exactly. You've created the space to step away, to read, to synthesize old thoughts, and to ensure you haven't fallen into the imitation rut. Relentless speed isn't about working continuously until you collapse. It's about working with such unified precision that you secure the freedom to remain an original.
Wow, that reframes the entire concept of hustle culture. The exhausted, frantic person sending emails at 2:00 a.m. hasn't mastered time. They're just firing birdshot into the dark and losing the battle to lost motion.
That's spot on.
So the general manager's in charge, the system is built, we're firing rifle balls and taking the time to rest the machine. But let's introduce reality here. The machine breaks. We drop the ball. We miscalculate.
It happens to everyone.
How does a 1913 operating system handle the inevitable reality of failure, roadblocks, and just crippling self-doubt?
Well, Adams doesn't pretend failure doesn't exist. In fact, he demands that we interact with it directly. He commands the reader to study your mistakes. And he uses a historical anecdote to differentiate between the kinds of mistakes we make.
He tells a story about Henry Ward Beecher, right? Who was a towering figure in 19th century American theology and public speaking.
Yeah, massive public figure.
So Beecher delivers this massive, impassioned sermon. Afterward, a young man approaches him, likely trying to score a few intellectual points, and says, "Mr. Beecher, did you know that you made a grammatical error in your sermon this morning?"
And Beecher's response is just perfect.
He looks at him and replies, "A grammatical error? I'll bet my hat that I made 40 of them."
The Beecher anecdote is brilliant because it perfectly illustrates the friction of doing big things. Beecher was moving the minds and hearts of thousands of people. He was operating at scale.
The grammatical errors were just the exhaust fumes of a massive engine running at full capacity.
Exactly. Adams uses this to point out that the big man is always greater than his mistakes because he rises right out of them and passes beyond them.
Adams is explicitly telling us to fail forward. His directive is to initiate dare. He argues that it's vastly superior to blunder along, making a mess but making healthy headway, than to stagnate in a state of terrified perfectionism.
But we have to be careful here because Adams does not give a blanket pardon to all mistakes. He makes a very sharp distinction in the text.
He absolutely does. He divides errors into productive mistakes and toxic mistakes. Productive mistakes are the grammatical errors in the Beecher sermon. They are born of daring, of attempting something new, of pushing the limits of your current capacity.
And toxic mistakes are fundamentally different.
Right. They are born of whining, of shirking responsibility, or of sheer carelessness.
He specifically targets the clerk who forgets a detail because he just wasn't paying attention, or the stenographer who makes errors because she simply doesn't care about the quality of the work.
Those mistakes don't build character, they sap and suck away your vitality. They are lagging indicators of a weak general manager.
A careless mistake is a violation of the bouncer named respect.
Right, but a daring mistake is proof that you were actually in the arena. So we study the daring mistakes, we learn the lesson, and we move on. But what about the paralyzing fears that strike before we even take action?
Ah, the hypotheticals.
Yes, the anxieties that aren't even mistakes yet, just terrifying hypotheticals. Adams dedicates a fascinating chapter to these, and he calls them ghosts.
The framing of ghosts is Adams at his most psychologically astute. He defines these ghosts as the phantom imaginations of sick, afraid minds. He categorizes them too. Failure ghosts, idea ghosts, regret ghosts, chance ghosts.
They're the spectral, formless fears that haunt the perimeter of our decision-making. Today, we've built an entire cottage industry of clinical-sounding jargon around this. We call it imposter syndrome, or execution anxiety, or analysis paralysis.
And Adams just strips it all down and calls them ghosts. He says they exist only in the dark alleys of our minds, and their only tactic is to hit you from behind with a sandbag when you aren't looking.
And his prescription for dealing with them is incredibly visceral. He doesn't say ignore them, and he doesn't say meditate them away.
No, he says you must walk right up to them, shake hands with them, look them squarely in the eye, give them a full hearing, and then kick them out.
It's a perfect protocol for anxiety management. Repression is the worst possible strategy for a ghost, because repression leaves the ghost in the dark alley, which is the only environment where it has power.
By commanding you to walk up and shake its hand, Adams is forcing you to drag the anxiety into the harsh light of conscious, analytical thought. You are forcing the ghost to articulate its threat.
Let's walk through what that actually looks like. Let's say I'm about to launch a new product or step on stage for a major presentation. The failure ghost appears in the alley. Shaking its hand means stopping and saying, okay, nice to meet you. Let's hear your pitch. What exactly are you threatening me with?
And the ghost says, you're going to stutter, the product will fail, and everyone will laugh at you.
And the moment the ghost is forced to say that out loud in the light of day, its power evaporates. You realize it's just a phantom. You realize that even if the presentation is flawed, you won't die. The stakes are an illusion.
Once you've given it a hearing and exposed its lack of substance, you execute Adams's final step. You kick it out. Because as he notes, live, red-blooded men can't be dragging around a lot of ghosts and amount to anything.
He writes that ghosts sneak like cowed dogs with their tails between their legs at the sight of doers.
Action is the actual exorcism.
The moment you start moving, the ghosts flee. But to take that aggressive ghost-kicking action, Adams introduces a non-negotiable prerequisite. This entire philosophy of the general manager and the rifle ball isn't just a mental exercise. It's anchored in a biological foundation.
Yes, the physical machine.
He states very clearly that people don't wear out. They rust out.
That distinction, wearing out versus rusting out, is vital. Wearing out implies a noble destruction. It implies you work so hard for so long that you literally ground your gears to dust.
But rusting out is a tragic indictment.
It is. It implies you degraded from a lack of proper use, a lack of maintenance, and a sedentary stagnation. Adams firmly believed that robust physical health is the absolute prerequisite for mental fortitude. He commends the reader to make confidants of air and exercise.
He writes that no great battle was ever won with antiquated artillery, meaning a weak, neglected, ill-cared-for body simply cannot execute the demands of a high-functioning general manager. You can't fire a rifle ball if the barrel is rusted shut.
He's drawing a direct, unbreakable line between physical vitality and the highest functions of the human brain. And for Adams, the highest function of the brain is imagination.
And he offers a great, simple physical practice alongside the air and exercise. He prescribes 22 carrot smiles.
I love that. Just the physical act of touching up your face with a genuine smile to change your physiological state.
And he argues that when the body is vital and the mind is clear of ghosts, imagination can actually take hold. He considers imagination the greatest asset the world's doers have ever possessed.
To prove the power of imagination, he points to two massive, world-altering contemporary examples from his era, William McAdoo and Guglielmo Marconi.
The audacity of what those two men accomplished is staggering. William McAdoo was the driving force behind building the Hudson River tunnels connecting New York and New Jersey.
People thought he was crazy.
Oh, completely. Adams describes how McAdoo, using only the eye of his mind, saw rapid transit cars carrying thousands of people daily underneath millions of tons of river water. The engineering challenges were considered impossible by many. People literally turned their heads and smiled at his dream. They thought he was a lunatic.
But his imagination was so solid, he forced the physical world to conform to it. He built the tunnels.
And Marconi's achievement is even more abstract. He's credited with the development of the practical wireless telegraph.
Adams beautifully describes how Marconi looked at empty space and saw messages floating on the invisible waves of the air, traveling over thousands of miles of ocean. He was also rated as crazy, but his imagination visualized the physics before the technology fully existed.
Adams quotes a German publisher named Perthes here, who said, "Imagination is the salt of earthly life, without which nature is but a skeleton, but the higher the gift, the greater the responsibility."
It loops perfectly back to the first principle of the general manager. If you maintain the physical machine so it doesn't rust, it generates the energy for a healthy mind. A healthy mind generates the imagination to see tunnels under rivers and invisible waves in the air.
And once you possess that imagination, you have a strict, unforgiving responsibility to act on it.
And to ignore the cowed dogs and ghosts that tell you it cannot be done. The mind-body connection isn't a 21st century biohacking invention. It was a fundamental architecture of success in 1913.
So let's take stock of our optimized human here. We've fortified the internal mind, we've exercised the ghosts, we've oiled the physical machine, we're guarding our 5 minutes, and we're aiming our rifle ball.
But unless you live in a cave, you do not operate in a vacuum.
Right. You have to interact with a world full of other humans who might be entirely disorganized, unhinged, and full of ghosts. This brings us to the social ledger. How does the general manager deal with society?
Adams approaches social dynamics with the exact same unsentimental operational clarity that he applies to internal management. He introduces a concept he calls the 50-50 principle.
It is so bluntly stated it almost stings. He writes, "No man in all this world ever rightfully gets more than he gives. And if he does, he is just a plain thief."
The plain thief.
The only just division in human interaction is an equal division. Half to you, half to him. 50-50.
This is a fascinating look at early 20th century transactional fairness. He doesn't limit this to buying a pound of flour. He applies it to the deepest human bonds.
Like employees and employers.
Exactly. He tells employees to take a hard invoice of their labor. Are you actually giving in service and value as much as you're taking in salary and experience from your employer? He argues that this 50-50 principle is the universal cure for broken up homes, disintegrated businesses, and abandoned friendships.
If you trace any dispute to its root, you'll find someone trying to extract 51% while only giving 49%.
He calls it the death of whiners. A whiner simply cannot survive in a strict 50-50 atmosphere because whining is an attempt to extract emotional labor without providing any value in return.
And to maintain this rigorous 50-50 balance, Adams requires another behavioral tool, frankness. He defines frankness as the art of saying the things you honestly think, exactly as you think them, while looking the other fellow squarely in the eye.
Now, we need to be very careful to define what frankness meant to Adams because he draws a sharp distinction. He explicitly states that frankness is not impudence.
Right. It isn't just an excuse to be a jerk.
Exactly. It isn't radical candor weaponized to hurt people, and it isn't blurting out every unformed, crude opinion that crosses your mind. Frankness is the face-to-face openness of mind and heart.
In an operational sense, frankness is sheer efficiency.
Just as a straight line is the shortest geometric distance between 2 points, frankness is the shortest conversational distance between 2 people. Anything else, hedging your words, engaging in passive aggression, attempting to manage someone else's emotional reaction instead of just addressing the core issue is just another form of lost motion.
Say out what you have to say with frankness. It cuts through the fog. But then, almost in the very next breath, Adams pivots to what seems like a contradiction. He extols the absolute power of silence.
It isn't a contradiction if you view it through the lens of efficiency. Frankness dictates that when you speak the unvarnished truth. But silence dictates that you rarely actually need to speak.
Adams highly prizes the silent man. He equates the silent worker with the get-things-done worker.
There is a phrase he repeats like a mantra in that chapter. Don't talk back. He lists a pantheon of historical titans. Napoleon, Cromwell, Washington, Grant, Lincoln, Marshall Field, Edison.
He says these men did not have the time or the inclination for disputes, wrangles, or petty revenges. They were doers of few words.
He frames silence not as an absence of speech, but as a form of unassailable wealth. He writes that silence is a wealth that cannot be answered because there is nothing to answer.
If you remain silent and entirely focused on executing your system, external critics cannot waste your time. They cannot manipulate your emotions or get you mad. By refusing to engage in the wrangle, you retain all of your kinetic power.
You don't leak energy.
I have to pause here because this specific advice feels wildly, almost violently countercultural today. We live in an era where the entire social and professional currency is based on the hot take.
Oh, without a doubt.
The platforms we use every day are algorithmically designed to incite us to talk back. If a controversy happens and you do not immediately broadcast a frank opinion to your network, you are often accused of complicity. To be silent on social media is to be invisible. And here is Adams from 1913, asserting that engaging in that endless broadcast of opinions is a total surrender of your power. Silence is wealth.
Adams would view a modern social media argument as the ultimate tragic culmination of lost motion. You're taking the energy that could be used to build a tunnel or invent a wireless telegraph, and you are loading it into a shotgun and firing birdshot into the void of the internet.
It makes noise, it creates smoke, but it achieves absolutely nothing. True power is refusing the bait.
It is a profound challenge with how we operate today.
Now, speaking of profound challenges, we have to confront Adams' views on debt. Because if he was uncompromising about silence, he is downright militant about debt. He abhors it.
He views debt not as a financial instrument, but as literal psychological bondage. He brings in a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson to set the baseline. The strongest man on earth is the man who stands most alone.
Adams extrapolates that philosophical independence into strict financial independence. If you owe money, you are leaning on the props that the sweat of other men's brows have earned. You are not standing alone.
He uses this vivid, disturbing metaphor of a weak little vine that starts growing at the base of a massive, strong oak tree. The vine climbs and twines and pulls itself up by leaning entirely on the tree until eventually it squeezes the life out of the tree.
The vine has no backbone of its own. He applies this to human relationships, writing, "The quickest way to kill a friend is to ask him to lend you money. If he is a real friend, he will refuse. If you are a real man, you will learn a lesson and thank him."
He does not mince words. Owe money, be in debt, and you stand by the props. You don't stand alone. He argues that when you take on debt, you are offering a part of your future autonomy for sale for a definite upfront sum. You voluntarily become a servant to a master who possesses a whistle that you are legally and morally bound to respect.
Okay, I have to step in and aggressively challenge Adams here. We are reading this in 2026. The entire architecture of the global macroeconomy is built on leverage and credit.
Yes, the rules of the game have changed.
Can a normal person buy a home for their family without a mortgage? Can a young person acquire the specialized education required to compete without student loans? Can a founder scale a hardware startup without venture debt? Is Adams simply being a harsh, unrealistic Puritan projecting 1913 economics onto a world that has fundamentally changed?
From a purely macroeconomic standpoint, your critique is completely valid. The mechanics of capital allocation have evolved. However, if we peel back the literal financial application and examine the psychological core of his argument, his warning remains terrifyingly relevant.
How so?
Adams is trying to protect the absolute sovereignty of the general manager. When you owe someone, whether it's a crushing financial debt to a massive institution or a heavy emotional debt to a mentor you rely on to solve all your problems, you structurally compromise your independence.
It degrades your ability to use the tools we just talked about. You lose the ability to be perfectly frank.
That is the exact mechanism of the loss. You cannot look the other fellow squarely in the eye and speak your unvarnished truth if you owe that fellow your livelihood. You cannot make the objectively correct, ruthless decisions for your internal company if a bank or an investor or an emotional dependent holds the ultimate veto power over your life.
That makes a lot of sense.
Even if we concede that debt is a necessary tool in the modern world, Adams's militant warning should act as a constant governor on our behavior. Understand that every single dollar you owe and every favor you borrow is a slight, measurable reduction in your freedom to act.
The ultimate goal must always be to maximize your backbone, to stand as alone and independent as the modern world allows. Stiffen your backbone. Use it to stand completely alone. And once you can stand alone, use it to bolster up the weaker backbones around you. When you frame it around psychological sovereignty, the militancy makes sense.
It really does.
So this brings us to the summit. We have built a fierce, independent general manager, a person who is frank but silent, who asks why, who kicks out ghosts, and who refuses to be squeezed by the vine of debt. What does this all add up to?
Right. What's the end game?
How does George Matthew Adams ultimately define a successful human life? This takes us to the final evolution of his philosophy, redefining true greatness.
He begins this final synthesis by drawing an immovable line between reputation and character. And in an era of personal branding, this might be the most vital lesson in the text.
Definitely.
Reputation, Adams argues, is simply what people say you are. It's external, volatile, and subject to rumor. Character is what you really are. It's internal, solid, and undeniable.
He brings in J.P. Morgan to hammer this point home. At the time, Morgan was the apex predator of global finance. During the Peugeot Committee hearings, when Morgan was testifying under oath before Congress about his immense power, he stated that character is the only gauge of a man, and that physical assets are therefore of secondary importance.
Morgan, a man who controlled empires of physical assets and capital, understood that markets panic, fortunes vanish overnight, and reputations can be destroyed by a single whisper campaign. But character is unassailable collateral.
Adams writes that character pays out endless dividends. It's the sum total of what a person actually possesses after they have won everything, and the sole thing they have left to rebuild with after they have lost everything.
And Adams links this abstract idea of character to something incredibly physical and permanent: our faces. He dedicates a chapter to the physiognomy of the human face. He states that the face is a marvelous piece of work and that a face never lies.
It's a beautifully romantic, almost poetic view of human biology. He argues that your internal boardroom, your secret thoughts, your hidden anxieties, your daily disciplines slowly carves and fashions the record of your ideals directly into the physical lines of your face.
You're literally chiseled by your choices.
He writes, "You cannot hop bail on your own face." It sounds like a line from a 1940s noir detective novel, but it carries profound weight. You can fake a reputation, but you can't fake the physical toll of your character.
And he points to Abraham Lincoln as the ultimate example. He argues that no political enemy could ever get a real hearing when they wrote malicious, slanderous tales about Lincoln, because Lincoln's wonderful face would silently contradict every lie.
When you looked at the deep, chiseled lines of sorrow, massive responsibility, and gentle humor in Lincoln's face, the character rendered the reputation irrelevant.
And that permanence of character allows Adams to completely redefine the concept of success. For Adams, success is not a final destination. It's not a specific accumulation of wealth or a title. He defines success elegantly as just a series of failures put to flight.
He uses the origin story of Marshall Field to illustrate this. Marshall Field was a quiet, unassuming clerk working in a country store in New England. His employer was so unimpressed with him that he literally pulled Field's father aside and said, "Take this boy back to the farm, he'll never be a merchant."
He was universally deemed a total failure.
But Field didn't accept the ghost. He packed up, moved to Chicago, and methodically built one of the greatest, most enduring monuments of retail commerce in the history of the world. He simply walked past the failure.
Because true greatness, Adams concludes, is invariably and inextricably tied to service. He states as a law of nature that the biggest man or woman who ever lived was in no way greater than a servant.
To serve is not to be subservient. It's simply to find something practically useful to do for the world, and then to do it with excellence. As he writes, he climbs highest who helps another up.
But doing the useful thing day after day requires an immense amount of energy. The fuel source that powers the general manager, that keeps the physical machine from rusting out, and that drives the service is what Adams calls enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm is the capstone of the entire architecture. It's the spark of ignition. He writes that enthusiasm is the force that goes through stone walls, that bores miles under great rivers with McAdoo, that wins historical battles, and that lays out new cities.
But he uses a second metaphor for enthusiasm that I absolutely love because it brings everything crashing back down to earth.
I know exactly the one you mean.
After talking about tunnels and wireless telegraphs and stone walls, he says, enthusiasm is the spark that finds the cows and brings them home.
It perfectly grounds the lofty rhetoric.
It really does. We can spend hours theorizing about the geopolitical impact of Napoleon's 5 minutes or the audacious imagination required to build a subterranean transit system. But ultimately, for the vast majority of us, life consists of daily, unglamorous chores.
Enthusiasm is the gritty, resilient joy that gets you out of a warm bed, into the cold rain, to find the cows and bring them back to the barn. You have to possess a fierce enthusiasm for the mundane realities of life, or you will never have the stamina to achieve the extraordinary.
Which leads perfectly to his final, overarching philosophy for how to interact with the world. A concept he calls Lincolnizing.
To Lincolnize your life.
To Lincolnize means to deliberately look past the trivial friction and flaws in other people in order to see their underlying capacity for greatness. He tells a historical story about Lincoln promoting General Joseph Hooker during the Civil War.
Hooker was a deeply flawed individual.
Very flawed. He had glaring personal faults. He was aggressively vain. He cultivated bitter enemies, and he had even harshly criticized Lincoln himself. But Lincoln, acting as the ultimate general manager, wasn't blinded by the superficial defects.
He recognized Hooker's high, rare qualities of battlefield leadership. He judged the man by his capacity for deeds and results, not by his interpersonal friction.
He saw the massive architecture of the man, and he didn't get bogged down in the grammatical errors.
Precisely. And this is where the entire operating system harmonizes. To truly count in this world, to find what Adams defines as happiness, which he says is simply helpfulness bubbling over, you have to hold two seemingly contradictory forces in perfect balance.
On the inside, you must maintain the strict, uncompromising, militant discipline of the general manager. You must aggressively ask why. You must hate the bondage of debt. You must guard your 5 minutes, and you must demand 50-50 fairness from yourself.
But when you turn outward to deal with the world, you must combine that internal strictness with the generous, forgiving, broad-minded grace of Abraham Lincoln.
You hold yourself to the absolute fire of perfection, but you Lincolnize your view of the flawed humanity around you.
You demand flawless execution from your own internal systems, but you accept and utilize the messy reality of everyone else. What a breathtakingly difficult, yet undeniably effective balance to strike.
It's the ultimate framework.
So let's look at the blueprint we've extracted from 1913 today. We began by recognizing that we need to call a serious boardroom meeting in our own heads, firing the interns and putting the general manager firmly back in the big chair.
We learned how to empower the bouncer named Respect, and how to put our anxieties on trial, look them in the eye, and kick the ghosts out into the alley.
We explored the necessity of treating time as an active, relentless force, valuing the 5-minute margin so intensely that we can afford to forge our minds into a single devastating rifle ball. We discussed the psychological danger of owing your future to someone else, the profound physiological power of a simple 22-carat smile, and the absolute unglamorous necessity of finding the enthusiasm to bring the cows home in the rain.
And finally, we learned to look past the noise of reputation, focus on the physical chisel marks of character, and Lincolnize our view of the world.
It's a remarkably complete, surprisingly modern operating system for human ambition. But as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over something that tests the limits of Adams' theories against the very real dangers of our current era.
Adams placed absolute, unwavering faith in the idea that your physical face and your undeniable character are ultimate truths. He believed that the chisel marks of your integrity would always inevitably protect you from false reputations and malicious rumors.
But today, in 2026, we are living in an increasingly synthetic reality. We are judged by algorithmic reputations, digital footprints, and artificial intelligence that can generate literal deepfakes of our faces and voices.
We collaborate daily with thousands of people across the globe who will never, ever look our physical face in the eye.
So the question you have to answer for yourself is this: in a future where the world cannot see the character chiseled into your physical face, how do you ensure that your true internal character still cuts through the digital noise?
Is it possible that Adams' 1913 advice to remain completely silent and let your work speak for itself might actually be a fatal liability in an era where those who loudly control the narrative often control reality itself?
That is a chilling, heavy, and absolutely necessary question for all of us to wrestle with. How do you prove to the world that you aren't just another digital ghost when everyone is only looking at screens? Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the mind of George Matthew Adams. We hope this exploration has given you some serious, high-caliber ammunition for the boardroom of your own mind. Now get out there, fiercely protect your 5 minutes, kick your ghosts into the alley, and take command of your day. We'll see you next time.